here. Doo, doo, doo. All right. So, as you all probably know, that's why you're here, right? We're going to talk about the equine industry and its role in ag tourism. So, ag tourism is something that applies to a lot of different sectors of agriculture, and one of those is being equine. Although I will say, it is its own ball of wax and has a lot. It can look a lot of different ways, and it definitely has some of its own special considerations. So, who I am. This is me. I am our office resident crazy horse person. It was really cool. I actually grew up doing 4-H in this county, and that picture is me from a couple years ago at Equine Fair in Springfield, Mass. And that is actually my 4-H project horse. I still have her. We've been together going on 22 years. Um, so I'm the resident crazy horse person. I deal with our CC Equine, which is our adult equine program. I do our 4-H equine program, new and beginning farmer, homesteading livestock, farm to school. Kind of the joke is whatever needs to be done in the office, I'll usually help and take it on. So I have worked, lived, played in the equine industry here locally my entire life. So I've got to see a lot of different things. We also travel a lot out west, my husband and I. So it's kind of cool that now I look at when I go out there, it's not just looking at pretty horses out in the desert. It's also kind of acknowledging their the equine industry out that way. So I've got to see a lot of different aspects of it. So what are we going to talk about? So briefly, what is agritourism and its applications in New York State? I'm going to mention a little bit, although many of you may already know, but if not, at least you'll have this as a reference and realize it's there to go back to. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but it's something that we'll reference a little bit, and it also helps with decision making. So if I don't mention it, I'm not doing my due diligence. So with that, it's going to be the 7 required areas to address in order to be protected under that New York State law with agtourism. And then we're also going to talk about what equine activities are considered agtourism, because not all of them are. There's a lot of dapple gray areas, if you will. Knowing your liability and risk is a big one, kind of understanding what's out there, and to have or build a relationship with your insurance agent, company, or legal team. That's a huge aspect in any part of agritourism, but like when we're going to speak specifically with equine, even more so. And then what to consider when considering equine agtourism. As I mentioned, it is its own ball of wax, can look like a lot of different things. So kind of talking that through, and it's something that I get calls on quite a bit, not necessarily always agtourism, but even just business and farm management and layout and design. I am the wall everyone kind of throws their ideas on to see what sticks, and I help people talk it through. So what is agtourism and its application in New York State? So there is Agriculture Tourism Act that was signed in by Governor Cuomo in 2017. This was landmark legislation as it kind of adopted in all of those inherent risk and liabilities for protection for New York State farmers and farm operations, which basically helped them absorb the risk of having the public enter the farm property and engage in ag tourism and or equine activities. As you can imagine, if whether or not you have a horse farm or any farm at all, the idea of having the general public on your property is kind of terrifying in a lot of ways. And I'll mention this a few times, and a big part of that, and I always explain to people, like I've been on school trips where I've gone with kids onto farms. This is not just their business, this is their home, this is their way of life. And as I like to call it, it's my little piece of planned paradise. It's very important to us. And so letting other people, we want to share it with the world and show them our beautiful piece of planned paradise, but it gets kind of intimidating to know that if something was to happen, you kind of put all that up on the table for risk. So this help mitigates that. In order to be covered, farms must adhere to all conditions and requirements of the legislation. So within that legislation, there are 7 required areas to address in order to be under the protection of the law. And they usually will refer to it as like the 4 S's, the 1 H, and the 2 M's. So 4 signs, 1 handout, and 2 management components. You need to have all 7 to fall under this protection. And it's not complete protection, but it's a really good start. So we're going to look at those 7 required areas to address. One is directional signage. And there's going to be a lot of signage with this. Pretty much when you have the general public on your property, you need to treat them like cattle. And it's like those things, I hate that I have to say it and I hate that we have to write it down, but you do. So signage needs to be visible, indicate places, areas, pathways that are open to the public as well as off limits. So do not enter is a great example. Warning to visitors signage. Every place of sale entry point for visitors must have easily visible signs that they're going to be encountering risks on the farm and engaging in farm activities. I hate that I have to write it down, but we do. You also, a great way to view this is you just need to assume that every single person on the farm that's coming there to visit has no idea what you're talking about, has no understanding of agriculture. You kind of need to treat them like infants, like that security wise and that safety net wise. If you can do that, you're going to be better off. They cannot be general warning signs, and this is something we'll mention again, is this is not a one size fits all. The signs and the warning signs that are on your farm need to be farm specific, not necessarily like apple farm, produce farm, horse farm. It needs to be very specific to your farm. When I'm talking with people, and I talk to a lot of different people at a lot of different sectors of agriculture, but since I'm the crazy horse person and that's my backbone, that's one of the ones I know the best is that you can have two horse farms that are on the same road that are the same size and do the same operation. And they're going to run and be managed completely differently. So therefore, your signs need to reflect that in your management. So operator provided written information. So this is the handout part. So visitors must be provided with written information. And this is the only signage with specific text that comes directly from the legislation. All other signage can be very unique to the own farm operation, but this is the one that has to have very specific text from the legislation, and it can be found in Appendix A. I have it all there. Please do not take my word for it. Go look it up. I tend to be one of those people that over communicate. So you can have written or provided, text and information. It has to have this. This would be a conversation you would have again with that legal team and your insurance agent and all that, if you should state more for more coverage, or if they're going to tell you, just be quiet, that says enough. If sometimes you open your mouth and you insert your foot. So going through that, there is specific text that you need to have. If you want to add more, that is between you and your legal team that you want to add in, but it has to have this. And this is one of the few that is specific to the legislation. So written information, your warning to visitor signs, and directional signage. This is huge, and we'll talk about that again a little bit later. All right, so visitor responsibility signage, kind of like the rules and expectations or the barn rules. Again, I hate that we have to write this down, but you do. I've done a lot of farm tours on a bunch of different types of agriculture farms, and it's kind of the biggest thing that we think about. The biggest topic of discussion is making sure people understand what their expectations are as visitors, and also to kind of control traffic and keep everybody going and understanding what the rules are. So this is going to be language that's going to kind of say that you as the visitor, what is your responsibility here? Okay. Exercise reasonable care regarding the activities that are going on in the farm. Comply with posted signs and other things. Remain on areas that are designated for agriculture, tourism, and out of others. A lot of these farms are working farms, and it's great to have people see that. I think it's actually very important. But there are areas that are during even working hours while people are there that are safe for them, and areas that are not. I always think about it too, like when we talk about the fairs. And then we have the big draft horses come in and they're setting up with their carts, and you've got people kind of coming in and out, and it's like, oh my God, you shouldn't be there. So this is a big one. Not to willfully remove, deface, or otherwise damage signage, warning devices or implements or other safety devices. Why do we have to write it down? But we do. Treat them like cattle, write it all down for them, make it very obvious, keep these things very clear, and they need to be posted in a visible way. So visitor responsibility signage is also a big part of that. Okay. Public posting or notice of rights to a refund. So you're going to have people on your farm, horse farm. Horses are unpredictable little creatures, right? They come with a huge liability. You need to make people aware of that liability and the inherent risk in which they're signing on for, regardless whether they're just visiting the farm or they're getting on a horse and riding them. Once they have been read and made aware of the required risk, you also need to let them know that if they do not want to purchase a ticket, they have a right to refunds because they do not want to take on the liability and risk of that. So that is another type of signage that needs to be put up. Again, this should be very specific to your farm activity. Like if you are not having, like if you're there and you're not riding horses or no one's riding horses on this ag tourism and your signage refers to that, it's not really applicable. It doesn't apply to your specific farm type. So that's really important. So employee training. Management must be provided with adequate training of all employees, basically to make sure that you are training these people to be able, you're training your staff to keep the general public safe and that they know how to handle these responsibilities and situations. So what is reasonable training? How do you have that? Well, documentation and proof, right? Your standard SOPs, standard operating procedures. This is also something that you might want to work with your insurance company, insurance agent, or lawyer and legal team, because they could help you kind of figure out what is that line, what is the threshold of adequate training. For example, you run a dude ranch and you bring in, what do they call them? Like your dude, a ranch hand, right? And they're going to lead trail rides into the woods. And if they come on, your standard operating procedure is that you hire someone, you train them for a week, they shadow someone else, they go through on several rides, they learn all of the trails. After a week of training, they're then able to work up to, and do all of these tasks. It's not like you hired him on Monday and then Tuesday morning he was out, running, and heading up trail rides. There was adequate time taken to make them aware of all the safety precautions and they were well trained. You may come up with an idea of what you think is sufficient. When working with those other professionals that we pay by the hour, they might decide that you need more or less, and then also the documentation for that. So then we have operator duties. Farm owners and operators are responsible for ensuring compliance with all aspects of legislation. So you need to know what the legislation is and know how it's applied. You also need to take time and take reasonable care to address preventable and foreseeable risks for visitors. And you really need to think about, just assume everyone has no prior experience with or exposure to agriculture. If you can kind of keep that as your baseline, you're going to be okay. Failure to do so is, negligence. You will lose the loss of protection against this legislation. So an example for this, again, with like horse ag tourism specifically, would be, you do trail rides. You go out and you inspect the trails before going out every day. So, honestly, I would love to be one of the ranch hands that goes out and checks all the trails prior to taking out groups. You go out. If you've had a lot of rain and you've washed out a couple of your trails, you're not going to take those that day. A tree falls down. I mean, yeah, the obvious thing is, well, you just walk the horses over it or turn them around. Well, you're making the assumption that these people can turn these horses around and they probably can't. So, that would be, a failure for that foreseeable risk, that, and it sounds silly, but if it's your home and your business, is that a risk you're willing to take? So it's something to consider. So these are the 7 required areas to address. These are the things that if you can address all of these, you can then be covered or, in hopes of staying covered under the legislation for the Ag Tourism Act. So horse farms and equine ag tourism is its own ball of wax. And everybody just thinks, well, especially when this first came out, that it covered and applied to everything, and it's not necessarily true. So what equine activities are considered ag tourism? Dude ranches and horse camps are kind of the big ones. Farm stays with horses, and we'll get more into what those kind of look like. Horseback riding. Now, given at dude ranches and horse camps and farm stays, it kind of feels like horseback riding is a given. That's an activity that will more than likely take place at those ag tourism locations. However, I grew up with a boat on Lake George, so coming down, even to this day, I can think about like 4 or 5 different places that were like places you could stop and go horseback riding in the Adirondack Mountains. Yes, we had 5 horses at home growing up. Yes, I made my parents stop, I think, at least once in my lifetime to take me for a 2-minute loop in a little circle on a pony, but when you're a horse crazy kid, anything you can do to be with horses, right? So horseback riding is one of those. Horse shows and equestrian sports and events. This is a big one that a lot of people didn't realize. And in all honesty, I didn't realize was considered ag tourism. The reason for that is because horse shows and equestrian events tend to bring in a lot of tourism onto your farm or people that wouldn't normally be there. So it kind of classifies as that ag tourism. Educational farm visits are tours. So if you have those things going on, you might not necessarily be an equine ag tourism location, but that does take part in that ag tourism. Therefore, that event during that time, you can fall under that legislation and fall under those rules and regulations and protection as well. So like the one that I always think of is Cooperstown, the Farmers Museum. It's much more than just it's ag tourism as a whole, not just equine, but like horse-drawn farming demonstrations. We have a farm in our county that they're a CSA. They have a lot of other things going on, but they also do have a team of draft horses, and they will do traditional farming. And so every once in a while, they do a farm visit or farm tours where they do that and they teach people about those things. So during that time, if you can follow those 7 assessed areas, you're going to fall under the protection of that legislation. Wagon or sleigh rides. These are also one of those things. I'll refer to this. I'll talk about this apple farm. I worked for this apple farm growing up. It was a larger one in our county. It was my first job. And I actually did pony rides at the apple farm. But these wagon and sleigh rides will also usually be in conjunction with other types of ag tourism, but these activities fall under that as well. So even if that's all you do, they are their own type of ag tourism. So now we have the dapple gray area, if you will, because we're horse people, and I think I'm punny. Equine assisted activities or equine therapy is not considered ag tourism. That is considered a type of, I have it written down here, excuse me. It's viewed as a type of medical treatment, so that is not considered ag tourism. However, there's that gray area, and understanding this is that an equine therapy farm can host tours, and those tours fall under ag tourism. For example, there is a equine assisted therapy farm here in Saratoga County. I, as like CC Equine and the extension, I work with them quite often. They're great people. It's a great organization, even better horses. And we have what we call our CC Equine horse farm tour. It comes up in August. And every year we kind of open it up to all the different horse farms in the county. And especially the farms that don't typically have the public on. And we open it up for them to participate. And for example, they will participate in the tour. They did last year and they're going to again this year. And during that time, when they have the tour going on their farm, they are participating in ag tourism. However, equine assisted therapy is not a type of ag tourism, but during that time they fall under it. So doing all the signage, direction of traffic, safety stuff, they can fall under that protection and legislation. So equestrian centers and boarding facilities. That's another gray area. So, and again, these will be conversations that you will have with those professionals you're paying by the hour as to how to protect yourself, protect the farm, future liability, all of these things, and different things to consider. So while these equestrian centers and boarding facilities are not typically considered ag tourism businesses, they're just commercial equine facilities or commercial equine businesses. Some will offer educational programmings, riding lessons are a gray area in themselves, or special events that qualify as ag tourism. So again, adopting a lot of those 7, accessible things are assessed issues, you can kind of help protect yourself. So again, having those conversations, knowing what the liability and what the risk is and what's out there to protect you is very important. So know your liability and risk. With this, the more that you know as the business owner and you have an understanding of, and self-education can really go a long way. Part of this too is, this is kind of where I come in as an extension person. I always give the I am not a lawyer, accountant, or veterinarian disclosure. However, I know enough to be dangerous, right? I've seen enough things and I've talked and kind of been pretty well rounded in that I'm someone that you can talk things through, you know, a local extension agent. Possibly it's another farm owner that you can have these conversations with, do your homework, do some research. So when you are with those people that you're paying by the hour, you're utilizing that hour much better. So understand your liability and risk. So inherent risk laws in New York State, know what they are. That define specifically to equine facilities and horse activities. New York State rules and regulations. This is the one I get all the time in everything, every ag topic. Local rules and regulations, just like your town codes, right? County and town ordinances. Those are super important. That will help you dictate how many horses you're able to have for your equine tourism property or business, whether or not you can have horses, or whether or not you can have ag tourism. Okay, so for example, in New York State, we have the Equine Activity Safety Code Act. This is just New York State law that has to do with horses specifically, and it limits the liability of equine professionals and sponsors for injuries or death resulting in inherent risk of equine activities. You know, it's kind of like when you go, me and my husband always have this conversation every year we ski. We like to do a lot of the very expensive hobbies. But we'll be skiing and we always kind of talk about how much they must pay for insurance on these, you know, ski mountains because like it's a very risky business. Um, and so is having horses, right? So in New York State, there's inherent risk laws. Now, other states have better, worse. We could argue that back and forth. I don't know all of them off the top of my head. But in New York State, it basically says, you know, when you go and you participate in these things, yes, you need to sign a liability waiver. There's an inherent risk to participating in these activities. Quite literally, this past Sunday, a friend of mine, we were horseback riding, and they were telling me where they take lessons. A young girl fell off during one of the lessons, and I think she ended up breaking her foot or something. And now the trainer is kind of in this, she's not really in the ball of wax yet, but there has been talk about like someone getting sued or whose liability is this? This is something that happens, very real. But these things exist. So there's also inherent risks in equine activities, and the inherent risk law falls under the Safety Code Act. But and its other states have better or worse, arguably, but it include the possibility of falls, kicks, or bites and other injuries due to unpredictable nature of horses. While it limits the liability of certain activities, it does not eliminate all responsibility. So there is a lot more to this rule and this law that goes into, but it's again that gross negligence. You know, if you're giving lessons or if people are using your arena and you don't pick stones out of it, or if you don't fill up holes and the horse trips and falls and somebody gets hurt, that's negligence on your part. You don't have adequate fencing, or if you don't maintain your fencing and the horses break loose and hurt somebody, hurt themselves, negligence, right? In addition to New York State rules and laws. And this is one I bring up because this is for New York State. I don't know a lot of other states off the top of my head, but I will tell you, like when we go out west, this is not a thing. And it's like really funny, like when it comes to helmets. So in New York State, all individuals under the age of 18 are required to wear a helmet while riding a horse, regardless whether or not they're on private or public property. In addition to this, the law kind of goes on a little bit more and states that if you are someone who is providing horses or providing access to horses, so if you're, you know, leasing them, renting them, you know, providing trail rides, it is your responsibility that every person under the age of 18 has a helmet and is provided with one. Any and all beginner riders, regardless of their age, are given helmets, and that regardless of their age, you provide every person that's on the horse with a helmet. Once they get over the age of 18, they can refuse it, but you have to provide that. That's your due diligence. Now, that being said, that's just New York State rule and law. Your insurance company, agent, legal representation may say, I really don't care whether or not they're under 18 or over 18. Everybody that gets on that damn horse is going to have a helmet on. And that'll just be the rule. They're like, otherwise, we're not going to cover you. That's like, you're going to have to do it. Again, while the New York State law says one thing, because of that inherent risk and possibly your coverage or whatever, you might have to go above and beyond. But again, it's knowing and understanding what already exists for laws and then possibly what you will need or want for additional coverage. So Local rules and regulations. They're a subject, but not limited to. Acreage requirements. So that usually comes down to how many acres per horse you'll need. I was like one of the towns by me. It's like every horse you need 2 acres for every horse, and a pony you need an acre and a half because they consider that half a horse. Or you need 1 acre. I think in one area they wanted like 15 acres per horse, which is a beautiful thought, but a bit much, but I get it. Building and manure storage and setbacks. So you can have manure piles, but they can't be within so many feet of a property line. You can have buildings, but they can't exceed a certain height. These are rules and regulations that, and I'm not going to pull out from different areas because wherever you are, it's not necessarily going to apply to you, but these would be in your town codes. Fencing. I actually had a town try to tell me one time that they wanted to dictate what adequate fencing was, and I was talking with them and I go, you really want that liability on your shoulder? To which I've not gotten a response from. Water body protection. There are a lot of NRCS rules and dumping manure so close to open bodies of water and blah, blah, blah. And that's poor land management, but there are rules and regulations on that as well. So you might not even be able to have a manure pit on your property. Permit for non-farm operation animals. Even though this would be considered like ag tourism in a farm, if it's not considered a business or is, there sometimes are other additional permits needed. Sometimes they don't consider horses farm operational animals, unless they're drafts or something. I don't know. But that's something to look into. And do they even allow or regulate ag tourism where you live? I've seen some people that they could have horses, they could do all these different things, but once they tiptoed into the ag tourism, the town went, nope. Or they wouldn't allow anything, but once it was ag tourism, they basically let them do whatever they wanted. So understanding those local rules and regulations is super important. Okay. Have or build a relationship with your insurance agent company and legal team. So when we're talking about all these inherent risks and knowing what they are, it's really good for you to kind of be at least aware of a little bit. Now, at the end of the day, you're not a lawyer, neither am I. That's why these people go to so much schooling, and that's why we hire them to protect us or to help protect us, right? They're very important and they have an important role. So the biggest thing, and this was something that I learned actually from the farm that I grew up on. It was my first job at this apple orchard, this local apple orchard. I started when I was 14 and I did pony rides. And I got to know the family very well. I worked there for a season. And what's kind of funny is I started working in other aspects and I did other horse things and I kind of grew up and I came back to extension. And then I started working with this farm again, but through as like an extension agent doing all these things. So about 4 or 5 years ago, we did an ag tourism webinar very similar to this. Wasn't equine specific. And it was actually this apple farm, and he was talking about his relationship and how important it is to build a good working relationship and trust with that legal team and insurance company and that agent. And I thought it was very interesting because at that moment I was thinking about when I used to work for them. I remember the conversations and the things that we were taught and through training as an employee for them, how to mitigate these risks, how to handle these situations, that SOPs, the standard operating procedures of how to handle things. And now I'm listening to it as he was talking about his background relationship and how he handled this as a business owner and how he handled mitigating these risks. So it was very interesting kind of how we went around it. And he was one of those that really stressed, they're not out to get you. They're here to protect you. You're paying for them to help you out. So the more you can disclose, the more transparent you can be, the better they can help you, the better they can protect you, and so on and so forth. So when you are locating insurance group, company, or legal team, you want to see that they're, yes, you can pick any type of, insurance agent. If they'll insure you, or a legal representation, but it is really good to, one, pick somebody who's familiar with ag tourism and that legislation and how that works. And if you're going to do equine ag tourism, it really helps if they speak horse. I will tell you, I do a lot of different sectors of ag. I'm a horse person by default. That's my native tongue. That's what I speak. My intern was a dairy kid, and I've learned so much more about the dairy industry than I ever realized. I think they're kind of crazy, and it's kind of funny because when I talk about horse stuff, she goes, "You horse people are crazy," and I go, "You're not wrong. We kind of are." So having somebody that speaks and understands your sector of ag can also be very helpful and can actually help you navigate and mitigate some of these risks even more so. So for example, insurance groups, and I'm not recommending any of these guys, they're just ones that I've looked up and I know have this ability. They're not the best ones out there, there might even be better, but it's something to look at. They do exist. American National Insurance, AM Risk Insurance Group, they were very interesting, really big into equine and do a lot of different sectors of agriculture or of equine industry and the different sectors of equine ag tourism. So it was very interesting. Law services, these are lawyers that you can do one of two things. They can speak the ag tourism and they can speak horse. Some of them can do both. The Hodgson and Russ, I've worked with them. They've done a few webinars for me in programs. The one woman, she handles ag tourism law and handling that for clients, but she's also a horse person. She shows Arabian horses, so she's really into that. So it's kind of cool. So she speaks both languages. Equilaw is another one. The 14 names down there, Scrollo, Fret, whatever. These are lawyers that handle ag tourism and or handle equine related businesses and practices. So if you can't get an insurance group that speaks horse, possibly having them do the ag tourism side and getting the liability and the legal side that speaks equine can help, and vice versa. It's a team, and a lot of times it's a team effort. Again, this is your home, your business, your livelihood. It is worth protecting. From that, and with this team, you want to build an honest and comfortable relationship. They're here to help protect you. Okay, talk about your goals, your ideas, get it out there, see if you're crazy, future endeavors. And the biggest thing here is fully disclose your concerns and incidents. So back to that apple farm I used to work on. When we were doing our ag tourism webinar 4 or 5 years ago, he was talking about, he goes, we have this farm, we have thousands of people that visit throughout the year. He goes, and thousands more just during apple picking season. And he goes, yes, do we have incidents? Maybe 2 a year, to be totally honest. And of all those incidents, he goes, I report them all. He goes, it doesn't matter if it was a fender bender with 2 cars, in the orchard, or a kid that was running through the corn maze and tripped and fell and we filled out paperwork or whatever. Immediately, I call my insurance company. I tell them that I filled out the information. We filled out the forms. We did this. This is what happened. This is the documentation I have to back it up and whatever. And he goes, what has happened is, of all of those times that I've let them know, he goes, 9 times out of 10, it is never followed through on. There is no type of claim done. There is no legal action that's taken. Once or twice it's started, and because these people kind of came in thinking they were going to get something out of it, but because I had full disclosure with them and they knew everything ahead of time and I had all my paperwork done and handed in, and I had my ducks in a row, it went no further. So in the same breath, he was talking about, he knows a lot of other farmers that do kind of quite the opposite. They kind of try to sweep things under the rug. They don't want to admit when there's an issue. And he's like, they've had bigger problems down the road because they didn't have that full disclosure. The people that are there to protect them had no idea what they needed to protect them on. In addition, something very interesting that he had mentioned was, he goes, they become a part of the farm team, right? They want to help protect us. So it kind of comes into being like, hey man, we've had a kid trip and fall in the corn maze for, how many, it doesn't happen often, but it seems to be like where you're always writing an incident report for. How do we mitigate that risk? So that can be super helpful. So building that relationship, although they are scary sometimes, getting them on your side can be very helpful. All right. So what to consider when considering equine tourism or ag tourism? It can look really different. So the big thing when I talk with people and we kind of go down this road, and I've had this conversation with ag tourism with quite a few horse people and non-horse people, is that first I ask them, what do you want to do? or what type of operation do you want to have? Because that can look like a million different things, and we'll get into what they kind of look like. The next question is, what level of risk or liability are you okay with, or if you can afford to take on and manage? So that liability and risk can be, how comfortable do you feel with people trucking in their own horses, or how comfortable do you feel with supplying adequate horses for people to use? Um, how much of that are you willing to take on or manage? Quite literally, is this something that you can manage safely as a one-man operation? Some of these big dude ranches, it takes a group effort because one person cannot safely run that operation. You need multiple people to ensure safety of everyone. So it's something to think about. And then no matter what you do, and I didn't state this before, I wasn't really sure where it would go, so I just put it here with a bunch of stars on it, is that no matter your operation, how big it is, 1 man, 10 men, conduct a regular risk assessment. You could have what you believe to be the safest operation in the world, conduct regular risk assessments with your legal team, with your staff, you yourself, um, surveys, ask people, kind of put it out there and see, because that's where you're going to find your holes, right? So what does equine ag tourism look like? So farm stays and horse camps. We'll kind of put them together. So these can kind of look a lot of different ways depending on whether you provide the horses or people bring the horses in. I've seen it both ways and it works really well. For example, a friend of mine's sister managed a big farmhouse. It was a Black Angus farm, but they were right next to I think it was the Brookfield Trail System. And it was a guest house, and you could actually bring your own horses. They provided a barn with stalls in addition to turnout. And their property butted up to the Brookfield Trail System, so you could ride a little trail right down. And they had access to all of these public trails that are publicly maintained. You talk about the best of both worlds, right? So they provided a facility, but they did not provide the horses themselves. So what is the risk with that? Well, the risk is a bit lower in that you don't have to feed the darn things, like feed horses. I mean, they were feeding the Black Angus, but they were a whole different operation. You don't have to feed these horses. You don't have to provide their annual care, farrier, all that fun stuff. Or that and I say guarantee, and it's never a guarantee, that these horses are not going to be crazy and will actually provide a safe ride for these people. So, but what the risk you do take on is that you provide a barn that is safe, clean, stalls that latch well, barn that's not a fire risk, can get in and out of safely. Can people come in and, there's not trip hazards. It's safe for the horse. It's safe for the person. You provide fencing and paddocks or pasture. Okay. Do you have adequate fencing in the pasture? What is defined as adequate fencing? Is a horse going to run through it? Is it visible? Does it have electric? Is there deterrence? Do you have a water trough? Do you just provide water access? Those type of things. So while you don't have the risk of managing the horses and the safety of the equines, they're bringing them in. Once those animals and people are on your property and in your care, you need to provide a safe environment for them to be. So whether it's with the horses or without. Same with camps and horse camps, whether you're running a camp where people I've seen this where they're youth camps. They'll come and stay for a week, and either the horses are provided for the kids, or the kids come to camp and their parents drop the horse and the kid off all in one rip, and they can do it that way as well. So that's something to consider. Again, it's housing them, both the human and the horse. Horses are not provided to use, they're just on site. Yes, people pay money for that. It's kind of crazy, but some people just want to go to a farm stay, right? They want to go stay in a farmhouse, go out their back door and have horses leaning over the porch eating carrots while they're drinking their coffee. Some people just want to have, access to those horses. I would call kind of like a petting zoo farm stay. Petting zoo is not the correct term, but having horses that are not inherently biters or bite people, or mean, that you have fencing, and I'll say this, for example, I have barbed wire fencing at my house where I have my horses, and most horse people think I'm absolutely crazy, but it works for me. If I was running like a farm stay or doing equine tourism, I would not have barbed wire. I couldn't. It's a liability for other horses and it's a liability for people because, people see something sharp and they don't think don't touch. Right? It's very frustrating, but like you wouldn't want to have that. Okay? So that's something to think about. Okay, I want to do the farm stay. Do I want to provide the horses? Because now I got to like work these things and lunge them, and then I got to keep up with tack. That's another thing too. It's not just the horse, it's the equipment. I've been to quite a few dude ranches and they've got 84 different saddles, are your girths tight enough? Is the leather dry and cracked? Are your stirrups going to snap? Do they fit people properly? Do they fit the horses properly? That's a big thing. That could be gross negligence if you're putting on saddles that are completely rotted away and you've got people and they're in the middle of riding and half the equipment breaks, reins break off. That's a huge safety concern. So when you take that on, that can kind of help you decide what you want to do. So you get into farm stays and horse camps. So that's just facility, whether you provide horses or not. Now we get into experiences that are offered because you don't just stay here and bring your horse and ride and have fun. We got experiences because everyone wants to experience farm tours. Yes. The first time I had really heard this, my husband and I were going out west and we're out in Arizona and I love being out in the desert. We do the side-by-side thing. It's a lot of fun, but like riding a horse out there is just really cool. So I wanted to go out and I wanted to, I wanted to ride a horse out in the desert. Um, but my husband found this like one place for us to stay. And he was like trying, they're like, oh, well, you can book a thing where you can get up early and help clean stalls and have the full farm. I started laughing. I'm going, hell, I'm on vacation, honey. I'm not paying to clean nobody's stalls. I clean my own stalls. I can do that I don't want to do it. The other option was we could fix fence. So like, you have people cleaning stalls. Could you just imagine being the barn owner and having people clean stalls? I'd have to go back and clean them a second and third time because I can't imagine they would do a sufficient job. Is there a liability of having them do that? Are they using any of the farm equipment? I hope not. That's a whole different realm of liability. Having farm tours, doing fencing. If they're going to help fix fence, the disclosure that fence tools bite, like to bite your fingers, right? Um, that also would probably drive me nuts because I'm very particular on the way I like my fence and tight and straight and certain heights and everything else. But there's farm tours. So the liability that comes along with that, it might sound like a really good idea. And then you have people who don't know what they're doing fixing your fence. Can you actually put animals out in that fencing now? Or do you just have a strand of fence that's just you constantly break for them to fix because it's an experience rather than actually usable fencing, right? So it's something to consider. Horseback riding again is an experience, or horse pulled activities. So like wagon sleigh rides, that was the best way I could put that. You're providing equipment. Is the equipment safe? Is it fit the horse properly? Does it fit the rider properly? When you have these places, you're going to have a rider from every shape and size, height and weight, everything coming. So do you have enough wide variety of equipment to accommodate that? Horse pulled activities. Are you driving? Or are they driving? That's a scary thought. Um, what type of liability in having those horses, if they were to get spooked or take off, their training that has been done. When you buy horses for these type of activities, are they trained enough to take part in that? That's something to consider. It really would suck to have a horse go have a runaway in those situations. Training and lessons. So kids are coming to horse camp, farm stay. They want to learn how to rope a cow or run barrels or jump over things or whatever. Training and lessons. So do you have people that are qualified to be giving those lessons and training, horses that can withstand it? And do you have the additional liability to do so? You might have enough liability for people to get on a horse and walk in a straight line down a trail, nose to tail, going through, but do you have the liability to have them throwing a rope off of a horse, running barrels or jumping, doing jumps and things like that? Again, these are conversations to have with that legal team. Horse events and activities. If you're a horse farm, boarding facility, and you want to have a horse show, having a horse show, having people that aren't usually at your farm truck in, that's a liability, right? vehicles, expensive vehicles and trailers, other horses, other riders that aren't typically there, having liability forms. How about just the medical risks? So, like infectious disease, transmittable diseases between horses, um, all of those things, making sure that there's proper vaccinations on all these animals and Coggins tests that are coming in. That's a liability. Let's say you have people staying at your farm stay. Again, and I've seen this, it's really popular out west too. Like they'll do, so if you stay for the week, they get you on the horse Monday. By Wednesday, they have you like running in the arena, like doing, working cows. And then by Thursday or Friday, you actually go out on a cattle drive with them. And you actually get to go out and help with like a branding or whatever. You don't really see a lot of that here in New York State, but that's a more out west thing. But hey, who knows? Maybe you could bring it to the state. If we could afford the liability of that, I have no idea. That's why a lot of those things exist in those western states, because the inherent risk and the liability out there is not like it is here. So there's different rules and regulations. Again, having those conversations and knowing that. But they'll do those type of things. But the greater the activity, the greater the risk you do or don't want to do or have to have the liability coverage for that. So the last one is farm tours. This is because this is a great place for equine ag tourism to start. You got a horse farm, you're doing horsey things, you have the general public on there to let them kind of see a window into your world or to teach them something. Again, like I mentioned, we have those equine assisted therapy farms that do those type of things. So farm tours, some big things to think about is parking and traffic. I will tell you that we had our Sunday on the farm in our county. One of the largest years that we had it on one farm, we had over 5,000 visitors on a Sunday. We had to let the local authorities know, and they had to help us navigate traffic. That's a big thing too with talking with your local county and town ordinances. Sometimes that's why they don't want ag tourism, because they can't handle the traffic, the influx of traffic because of those things. But parking and traffic on your farm is a big one. Providing safe areas for people, and then for people and people out of not safe areas. Yeah. So you want to provide safe areas for the people and then keep the people out of not safe areas. I'm having a hard time with English there at the end. But when you have those things going on, it's something to consider. Yes, the general public is going to be coming on. It might only be for a day or a few hours, but in that time, where are you going to let them have access to? Where can you not let them have access to? Having, again, those adequate signs, the signage and verbiage and all those type of things, and handouts and liability waivers, what's needed and what's not, is very important. But farm tours are usually kind of where this ag tourism starts, and it grows from there. In addition, there are also great ways to get feedback from people. You have these farm tours, you could do a survey or be like, would you be interested in doing a stay here or whatever? Kind of just like little marketing, get some further information about what you want to do. But the liability there is something to consider. If you want to do that and you're okay taking on that risk of farm tours, cool. But you're like, I do not want people spending the night here, and I do not want their horses spending the night here. That is too much for me. That is understanding the risk in which you're willing to take on. So that's important. So again, equine ag tourism can look like a lot of different things, and it's kind of cool because you can kind of put your feet in the water and test it out. So final tips and takeaways. Know the legislation, your rules and regulations. Act on all 7 components of the Ag Tourism Act, right? We have it in New York State. Thank you. Let's use it. Understand it and use all 7 components. Otherwise, it's not covered. Remembering too, very importantly, one size does not fit all. The signage that you use needs to be very specific to your operation and your specific operation. My farm is Timberlane Farm. It's not just a horse farm. It's not just horse farm signs. It would be very specific to my operation. Build a relationship with your insurance agent, company, and legal team. They're here to protect you, so let them protect you. Talk to them. Have an open dialogue. They're not here to hurt you, and they want to help. Take time to consider what type of equine agritourism you want, can manage, and are willing to take the risk on. Sometimes the best thing is to kind of go out there and see what other people are doing. Talk to people and what they found works, what doesn't work. I find the most valuable information when I talk to other people who have done things is, don't tell me what went right. Tell me what went wrong, because I can learn much better from mistakes and things that didn't work than what did. Because what worked for you might not work for me, but what didn't work, I can understand why and go, yeah, you got a point there. or I can't believe you didn't see that not working. Learn from it. Um, and then conduct regular risk assessments, right? Whether you've been doing it for a year, 6 months, or 20 years, constantly do that regular risk assessment, because if you're doing it, you're staying on top of things, you're doing your due diligence. And that also means that you can kind of see these things and head it off at the pass, right? Before it becomes a big problem. And that will probably make your insurance company and your legal representation very happy to know that you're doing. And it actually might help lower costs and things for that as well. So again, this is me. This is my contact information. If you want somebody to throw ideas at and see what sticks on the wall, I've had a lot of conversations. I've been to quite a few farm calls and or farm visits, and we sit down at the we sit at the kitchen table with a thing of coffee, and 3 hours later, where we started and where we ended are two very different places. But then they take those ideas and questions and move on to the people they're paying for by the hour, and they can utilize that hour a little bit better. So please feel free to reach out. I love speaking horse. I love talking horse with people, or just about anything agriculture.